And as it applies to the group dynamics of Black people, that goes into keeping us in a position to where we're not producers, but we maintain our status as consumers. And then we just want to continually be how the latest fashion, how the latest this and latest that, and stand in line and camp out all night to get the next iPhone and a PlayStation and all that other stuff. So you stay stuck in a consumption mode. And being stuck in that consumption mode is a form of mind control, because here you are dealing with a product that you're completely satisfied with, but now all of a sudden that same product 2.0 comes out and it has these levels of enhancements. And so automatically you want those latest and greatest things. So it's literally like technological crack cocaine is literally all they do. And it goes into neurolinguistic programming, which we talk about, you know, time and time again. But those are aspects of mind control.
How long is your list?
The Panther 48.
Willing to die for.
The Panther 48.
Willing to die for. How long is your list?
What is the tribal self?
The Panther 48.
The tribal self is what goes above the immediate acquaintances of the social.
Willing to die
The
for.
family, the people you know, live next door.
You will be willing to die for.
Tribal self.
Panther 48.
I'm talking about those movies, those get on board, the ancestors is tied into the tribal self.
Panther 48.
What does that mean? That means that the tribal self constantly reminds us
Willing to die for.
that we don't have the right
How long is your
to
list?
claim independence
The Panther 48.
of the history of which we are part. So, don't nobody care that you individually were the slave in South Carolina. The tribe was in.
So let me jump into this here. So what does it mean to have personal investment? To have resources to invest tend to be a luxury to most households, regardless of the investment. But this is not necessarily the real case. Let's expand on the definition of investment. To invest is based on sacrificing something in the present for a return in the future. In nature, reproduction is the base sacrifice made for a future return. This elementary example can be expanded to include, let me grab that here, a retirement account. This is the expected go-to definition / trap to keep us operating on individual course. So I'm saying here, what's missing in this example? And when you look at this, based on even what we talked about in skill level number 1 training, you got an individual that goes off to college, gets their first job, starts a family, first home, children's education, aging parents, retirement, estate distribution, which is the death of that individual, and then it all starts over again. But when you look at this cycle, based upon Panther training and the trifecta, what do you see missing?
I'm gonna say that I don't see, I guess like investment in community for me.
Bingo. Ding, 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 ding.
Ding,
That
ding.
is exactly it. Because when most people think of the word investment, they do not think of the community as a legitimate investment. They tie investment directly to this path here. And that's usually as far as it goes. That's why I refer to it up here as saying the expected go-to definition / trap to keep us operating on an individual course. And what I also did is I went on the internet and I even typed in personal investment, then I typed in community investment, and both things still tied right back to this same cycle. And it was all geared toward, and if anything, most of it was that I found in terms of the search engine was geared toward financial planning, basically. And that is as far as they go when they talk about investment. So then that basically lets you know that the definition that is projected and promoted in terms of investment is again broken down and only applied to the individual level. So there's no actual there's no, to me, there's no wonder why we find ourselves looking at doing community work as an option or a non-necessity, and something that is an elective or outside of the scope of what you should do as a family. Because when we think of the word investment, we don't think of the community as investment. So going into slide 2 here, I've expanded examples. Hold on, let me see. Did I skip anything? No, I didn't. Okay. Expanded examples, which is a brief list. Raising the political and social consciousness of children. And I put in parentheses, not just your own bloodline. Because again, we're talking about investment. Exercising for self-defense, for the well-being of defending others as opposed to just yourself. Eating healthy for longevity as opposed to eating for emotional support, because that tend to be how we form our diets, based around our emotional support. And the chemicals often that they put in foods are geared toward emotional stimulation, which again causes us to go right back to those same foods, which are really non-foods. Working a community garden, figure you really like that one, in addition to your own yard garden, because most people don't recognize the bond and just the camaraderie and the importance of just doing something like that on a collective level. Being on a jury trial, too often we find ourselves, especially within the Black community, trying to look for excuses not to be on a jury trial, because we want to state hardship and all kinds of things. It takes us from our work and so forth. But at the same time, by not being on a jury trial, hell, 9 times out of 10, it may be somebody Black that's going to be looking at a significant amount of time in prison. And so we should be there to see to it that the jury matches the peer group. And a lot of times the reason why it doesn't, and it's not necessarily obviously the case in San Diego based upon the percentage of population, but in general, we tend to shy away from jury trials. Reading for the sake of acquiring a new life skill, but not built around financial gain. Because too often when people invest time and look at reading as an investment, it has to do with reading about something about financial investment. Casting your vote on a local election for someone outside of the lesser evil category. Because oftentimes when we look at the idea of voting, we basically go into it with the mentality that it's all evil. There's nobody that's going to be involved in public office that I really care about. So then I'm just going to jump into it from the position of, well, let me choose the lesser of the evil. And so we commit ourselves to the idea of voting just on a negative point of view and perspective, which goes into the next point: supporting a political office campaign other than the asses and the ivories, which is basically what I mean when I say the Democrats or the Republicans. Joining or supporting co-ops, learning how to use a firearm so you can teach others how to use a firearm. Disaster preparedness planning for your family, then neighborhood, then community. So that's one of the big things that we find ourselves not doing well within our communities is disaster preparedness plan. A perfect example of that still resonates with me to this day is what happened in Katrina in New Orleans with the flood. And I don't know how familiar you are with that, but I was actually down in that area. I served as a part of a search and rescue in a relief program. Then when I was in the new Black Panther parties, we actually went down and helped and assist and get some people out. And I just remember how unprepared the community we was as a community, as Black people, when that hit, and how so many of us was just victims, and then all the unnecessary deaths as a result of what happened. And what a lot of people that are not familiar with the situation that happened don't know, that the rain had already stopped when the levees blew. It was just a buildup of water. And then a lot of people even go as far as to say that they exploded one of the levees in order to prevent another one that was in a more white sector from exploding or from busting over. So then they exploded the one near the black community.
Yeah, I didn't know that at all. I was like 8 when Katrina happened. So I guess I had always thought that it was like there was a really big hurricane and that's 100% what did it, and there was, like there was no way it could have been prevented except better planning, in the past. Like I had no idea that the rain stopped.
Yeah. And that was the thing. That's how I caught so many people off guard, because the deal is people box themselves up to prepare for the hurricane. And literally after after the hurricane blew over, everyone had the mentality, okay, everything's is okay and normal. And then all of a sudden, a lot of people, in their house, sleep, doing what they're doing, relaxing, not having a care in the world as far as that part go. And then next thing you know, you get waves of water just coming from out of nowhere.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, I had no idea.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess like specifically the disaster preparedness has always been one that I've had a hard time communicating the importance to the community. And I think that it's because it feels like a lot. And I think that it's something that you do like slowly over time. And I think that it's like very costly.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like providing ways that you can do it slowly and like cost effectively over time. I think is super helpful.
Yeah, and see, that's the thing, and that's in fact the way I've always taught disaster preparedness, is that you start addressing it over a period of time. So like basically every paycheck, you buy just a little bit more and a little bit more, and then you start stocking up, and then you as your stock gets to a decent amount to where you got 1 month worth of supplies, then 2 months worth of supplies, and then 3 months worth of supplies. At that point, now you start rotating your stock, and then it's easy from their on. It's pretty easy because now you have that surplus of supplies, and in fact, then you have what you call preparedness. You have parties with this is kind of a home thing, that you start having parties so you can, in essence, eat some of the stuff that you stocked up on before it expired, as you start replenishing some more. So then now at some point within your grocery budget, you spend a whole lot less this month, because you're going to eat up a lot of the things that you've had in storage that is about to go bad. So from that standpoint, now you can go buy a lot more to fulfill the stuff that you got in stock, and you're not spending a lot of money, because you're not spending that much money on immediate groceries, because you're eating off of the groceries that you've already stored. So really, it's just the hardest part about it is just getting started and getting to a point to where you have enough. But this is literally something that should be done in all communities. And so from that standpoint, when you take a community, you take a household, and you start working on that community disaster preparedness from that standpoint, and you start dealing with the food aspect of the household, it's super easy. It's just about getting started and then just pacing yourself. The problems we usually have is like COVID, for instance, when it hits us and we find out a month from now that we're going to go into a shutdown. Well, now all of a sudden you're in panic mode, because you only got 1 month to buy supplies that needs to last you for more than a month. So the average household typically gets paid every 2 weeks. People typically get paid every 2 weeks. And so if you expect me now to be able to buy a month, or 2 months worth of supplies in a 1 month's time, a lot of times that's economically not feasible for most people. Why? Because we waited till the necessary moment to now prepare for it. And so that's why it's a big deal. And then that's also why what happens too is people go into panic mode and start buying up all kinds of stuff out of the grocery store. because now all of a sudden everybody's inundating the grocery the market system at that point in time, which causes them to run out of stuff. But had everybody just gets a little bit at a time, then you wouldn't have those kind of panic situations. Okay, let me keep going here. Okay, so the next one I show is supporting a cop watch, not just being a noisy neighbor. And that's when, again, when we talk about it from the standpoint and approach of investing, the idea here is recognizing the importance of making sure we can see what's going on with the police, making sure you're involved in addressing how they over police certain areas as opposed to other areas. And so it's getting involved in that. And then of course I throw up here joining the Black Panther Party. Instead of joining the block party every other weekend, you'd be surprised how many times I've, from a recruitment standpoint, go out and say, hey, I'm with the new Black Panther Party. And somebody actually, out of ignorance, thought we was talking about a actual party. I've had that many a times. So I had to throw that in there. Working within with the grassroots movement instead of honking your horn at those people blocking your way to work. Because you see that, people not seeing the significance of maybe certain protests and the fact that ideally when you're doing protests, your point is to block traffic. Your point is to make it inconvenience to those people that are not concerned about what the hell is going on in the world. And then those are your folks that blow their horn. And I get it. People got to get to work, which goes right back into the whole cycle of why we're addressing this. But nonetheless, is from that standpoint, it tends to be viewed that either you support the idea of protesting, for the sake of getting recognition of injustice, or you are dead against it. And then the last one here is what I'm basically saying, that we need to view everything we do with our time as an investment. And that's in essence how this all starts, is because we don't view our time as an investment. We don't view all of the things that we just talked about as personal investments. We just simply tie personal investment back to making money. And with that narrow perspective, that is why we get ourselves in trouble and not able to recognize as a people the importance of a community. So with that being said, these are investments we make every day. The only factor that we all share as an equal obstacle is time. All other variables and conditions that latch to our environment, perception, social, physical, and mental limitations. And so from that standpoint, what we're saying here is that the biggest precursor, and like I said, the equal obstacle is time, because that's the one thing that prevents so many people from even considering these other things, is because they got so many other things and distractions that they feel they can be involved in. And so from that standpoint, that becomes the one obstacle. Often through the lack of self-identification, which is true purpose, we impose our limitations on others, which shape collective perceptions and feed into the generations of future limitations. This creates a perpetual cycle of victimization and thereby carrying over to the base reproductive investment, aka the child or the next generation. That child then starts off on a path with these embedded limitations based upon what was thrown at them, that will add to the new ones that they happen to generate along the way. With all of this, we find the definition of personal investment a bit different than what we first thought it was before we expanded on the application. And so from that standpoint, and I know those of y'all that came in late, we basically started talking about how this here cycle, life cycle planning, is what people mostly consider to be a personal investment. And I just asked, since we did get a couple more people on, I just go ahead and ask, Ron, let me pick on you for a minute. What do you see missing out of this picture here? You start with college, get your first job, start a family, first home, children's education, aging, retirement, and estate distribution?
I would say something that pertains to more of like a life work, like a life purpose, where you help other people or make an impact on the world before you leave.
Exactly, and that's why we're basically going in this from the standpoint of injecting a community element. And so in preparing this class on the internet, what I did is I typed in the word personal investment, and all personal investment brings up is a whole lot of stuff that relates around financial planning and financial goals. Then I typed in community investment, and then that pretty much brought up the same thing. Everything was tying back to finance and how you develop your finances for your family. Nothing said anything, even though you use the word community investment, nothing actually talked about investing in the community. It was all geared toward finances. And so from that standpoint, that's why we went into this and to expand on the definitions of what personal investment means, and some ideas and some things that people need to, open their eyes to in terms of what investment is, because they don't see the community as a part of that investment. And so therefore we have this negative perception of what investment is, and it's no wonder why our communities suffer the way they do. All right, so go to the next page. So now let's set the proper tone to address the concept of personal investment as it applies to coding of imperialism, with the introduction of a few definitions. And again, keep in mind that this was our public PE class. So a lot of this stuff here, y'all have already, internal members have already seen. But let's just go over it a little more in depth for the sake of the discussion here. Political recipe for control. The combination of influence, resources, alliance, and military domination to produce a global product. This 4.2% active ingredient allows for a diverse mixture of inert components to serve as a base composite for all other recipes. America makes up 4.2% of the sandbox, but operates from a future entitlement of the entire sandbox, which is colonialization. And so I know that one wasn't necessarily on y'all's class, but people have to recognize what a political recipe for control is. And so that's important that we know that. And again, dealing with the combination of influence, resources, alliance, and military domination. And basically America makes up 4.2% of the world population. But yet when you talk about the influence and the amount of resources, military domination that is controlled by the United States, you get the idea, you get the overall picture of what's going on. And so from that standpoint, that is the political recipe for control. So that's some very important piece of political education, just that definition right there. So that also leads us into social engineering, the manipulation of the social position and function of individuals in order to manage and create a desired society. In today's subject context, the idea of a personal investment is isolated to reflect the bubble of individuality. So again, that thought process of when you say the word personal investment goes into the narrow perspective that people have on social engineering. Go ahead, Brother Deuce.
When we had the Zoom, one of our sisters mentioned that by the time you hit college, you should already know what it is that you want to do. And I understood where she was coming from. At the same time, I felt like I've, watched myself grow and extend myself into just different aspects of life in different roles. And I'm a completely different person than I was, when I was 18. Now, mind you, I didn't go straight to college. I graduated from high school, barely graduated. I ended up going to community college. once me and my wife moved to Los Angeles, I got into the music entertainment industry. I'm also in the beauty industry. With my wife, we have our own business. And I would have never thought that I would be here, let alone be a part of the San Diego Black Panther Party. So I think when society puts these stipulations on us and tries to put us in sort of a chokehold, it limits us. And I feel like going forward, I know that I have to be patient with my own children. I have to, sort of let them venture out on their own, make their own decisions, and, in a sense, see what sticks. Because there's a lot of people who have went to college, have gotten a degree, gotten a great job, and make tons of money, but are miserable. You know what I mean? There's people who would, maybe would love to take less money and would be more fulfilled doing more of like, like social working, you know what I mean? Helping other people. So yeah, I just wanted to throw that in there.
Yeah, and one of the biggest elements within that recipe that you're talking about has to do with what we define as a family structure. Remember, that's why we also, within the Panther Party, we talk about the family structure must include the community element, going back to our trifactor, which is the individual, the family, and the community. The community folds back into the individual, which folds back into the family. And so when you talk about the youth being raised in a isolated environment away from a community building process, that means that the children will have less exposure to other diverse ways of life, you see, and other diverse things that they can be as an adult. And so therefore it's that much harder for them to settle in and figure out what they want to do. And then with that same mentality, keep how, especially here in America, how we have the mentality where as soon as our children turn 18, we want them out the house. And even if that means they go live in a dorm and then go to college. But the idea here is that we pushing you out the house. We forcing you to hurry up and grow up, and that mentality tends to make you as a parent say, well, what is it that I can push my child to do that's going to earn the most money so that they're guaranteed to be out of the house and on their way to college and doing whatever they're going to do at a certain age. And so then we end up getting forced into these economic positions, or forced into these career paths. And then oftentimes what you have happen within our households is you have to where the grown-ups are living through the children. So for instance, by the time I turn 40 years old and my child is, say 10 or 12 years old, and I'm looking back on my life and there's certain things that I didn't accomplish that I wanted to in terms of being in a miserable job situation. Now I'm going to project what I wanted to be on my child and say, hey, this is what you should do. And so a lot of times we end up living through our children from that standpoint and forcing and trying to push them in the direction that we wanted to go to, but didn't necessarily go to. So there's a lot of dysfunctionality in terms of the dynamics that go into that. And then oftentimes, if we're not even able to recognize that, especially as a parent, and we project that on the children, then they're going to end up doing the same thing as they grow up and then project the same thing on their children. So that begins to create, again, this perpetual cycle. So that's kind of really what happens to us a lot of times. Go ahead, Brother Deuce.
Yeah, I want to comment on or piggyback off that. My brother is going through sort of like a unique situation where like I grew up without my father. My father wasn't present. My mother and father split when I was about 2 years of age, so I don't quite remember him. My brother, his father was in his life, and his father played ball. So he steered my brother in the same direction. My brother ended up going to a Division II school in Utah, Dixie State. He played running back. His fourth year, they didn't play him. So it was a bit of a shock. Like once my brother graduated college, for football to come to like an abrupt stop. So he went through a lot, you know what I mean? Because ball was life, this is the game that he loved. And because he didn't go further than the college level, him and his father actually started to become distant. Now it's almost as if he has an absent parent because, his father pushed him in a direction of, wanting to see him play ball and be a professional athlete. And once that didn't happen, and you know what I mean, it's almost like his dad like lost hope in himself, and they no longer have a relationship.
Yeah, and that basically goes back to like you said, like the point I was making. His father was living through him, and when his father saw him go through the same level of disappointment that he went through, it made him feel that much more of a failure. And then he even projects his failures onto his son, never looking at education for the sake of education and looking at the sport aspect as an opportunity to get education. But the opportunity to get education, the education itself was secondary, and therefore was never approached from a position of being able to use it as a life skill and actually move forward, move in life with that. And so again, we tend to have these wrong definitions and perspectives on what things mean, which again is why we're having this discussion on personal investments, because we don't recognize that. The next one here, Operation Him, and y'all pretty much should know this one from skill level 1 training. But here what we have here is handicapped education, keeping the youth ignorant of real mathematics, real economics, real law, real history, by way of inefficient process and methods designed to teach linear quantitative perception, which is basically, in a nutshell, when we talk about linear quantitative perception, it's teaching people to think in a pattern that has blinders on it. And by doing so, it even goes back to one of the examples you just gave. By doing so, my point would be that I'm going to push this person to be this and this only. And you're stuck in that box. And by being stuck in that box, you don't have the altitude to be a critical thinker and then also deal with the exposure of a community environment that teaches all of the different options. And then so therefore you have more of a holistic approach to moving forward in life. And so that's why we always talk about it from saying teaching real mathematics, because what we tend to do with math throughout the grade school system is we think of the application of math not necessarily having any real place within a society once you get grown, because very few people really look at math for what it is. And then when it comes to economics, that's not taught in the system. So then your point of view and position on economics has to do with basically built around consumption, built around things that you want to acquire, as opposed to recognizing how we teach it within our mechanism system as dealing with resources. We know resources are used to build a community. And then when you talk about the real law, it has to do with the justice/injustice system and how things are applied. And so therefore, those that empower know how to manipulate that. And then real history goes into knowing who we are. And so when these things are not provided intentionally, we're talking about a handicapped education. So then the next one here would be irrelevant entertainment, keeping the masses on stimulus entertainment that channels at or below a 6th grade level. So oftentimes our entertainment is designed, again, to keep you only stimulated at this low level of thought processing. And by doing that, when we stay at that low level and then you become an adult, then you are stunning your logical and psychological growth. Go ahead, Brother Ron.
Hey, my bad, Brother War. I hope you don't mind.
No, it's a small class, man. So we just rapping.
All right, so look, did you hear about it was like an AI rapper that got signed to Capitol Records?
And then dropped what, 2 or 3 days afterwards?
2-3 days afterwards, because of the backlash of him saying the N-word.
Yep.
What's crazy is that made me think that if record labels really wanted to put out good music with a positive message, they have the power to shift the frequency.
Yep.
But they won't. So.
Correct. Yeah, and I've listened to a couple of the AI songs, and it reminds me of what is his name, Tekashi 6ix9ine. That's what he basically sounded like.
Yeah.
So yeah, and that's a very interesting point. And from that standpoint, that's a whole nother class and discussion when we start talking about artificial intelligence. So the next one here would be mind control, exercising direct influence over another mind, whether it be deliberately or inadvertently, to direct the perception of logic. And that's the key point of that a lot of people don't pick up on when we talk about mind control, is for the directing of the perception of logic. And so when you gear individuals away from logical and critical thinking, then you basically enhance their zombieism. You enhance them staying steadfast within the confines of how the system is operating. And so therefore, when injustices happen, we approach injustices like an individual, as opposed to recognizing the empowerment that we can have as a collective. Because when these things happen to us, because we've been raised as individuals and raised for the pursuit of the American dream as an individual perspective, then we find that we're isolated, or we find like we don't necessarily know what to do. And so then what do? We turn to an attorney. You turn to the same system that's continually feeding off of your ignorance, and not recognizing that we need to have a collective power to change those dynamics so that the situation doesn't continue to repeat itself, which goes into one of the things we'll talk about later on, which has to do with how we basically learn to cope with obstacles. So from that standpoint, when you're dealing with mind control, always think about the end game of mind control is to direct the perception of logic. Because too often when people think mind control, they think of it as this big thing where somebody is going to be outright operating like this robot, or way off the beaten path, and in that it just stick right out like, oh shoot, I can tell that this person is just all screwed up in the head. No, it's not like that. Mind control has to do with everything that inundates you subconsciously, that causes you to operate the way that it was intended to, for keeping you in a certain mode of thinking. And as it applies to the group dynamics of Black people, that goes into keeping us in a position to where we're not producers, but we maintain our status as consumers. And then we just want to continually be the latest fashion, how the latest this and latest that, and stand in line and camp out all night to get the next iPhone and a PlayStation and all that other stuff. So you stay stuck in a consumption mode, and being stuck in that consumption mode is a form of mind control, because here you are dealing with a product that you're completely satisfied with, but now all of a sudden that same product 2.0 comes out and it has these levels of enhancements. And so automatically you want those latest and greatest things. So it's literally like technological crack cocaine is literally all they do. And it goes into neurolinguistic programming, which we talk about, time and time again. But those are aspects of mind control. So in essence, we really just don't know how deep mind control goes in a society. But the only way capitalism can continue to work the way it works is by making sure the population is impacted the way it is on mind control, through mind control. So the next one here is codependency, a relationship in which a person is physically or psychologically addicted or conditioned to a specific pattern that renders them incapable of operating from a position of self-control. Feeding right back into mind control. When you talk about codependency, and we're dealing with a position of self-control, we're talking about to where we can't help but to spend our money. We can't help but to be in debt. We can't help but to want the latest and greatest. We can't help but to compare ourselves and our self-worth to that of someone else. And then that even folds right back into what we was talking about earlier, Ron, where as a child, what are the role models that I look up to? Typically, the role models people look up to are people that are based on certain levels of financial gain and certain levels of financial freedom and independence. And even this even goes into, especially when you start talking about social media, to where what's projected is someone that has what they call an influencer, someone that has the ability to galvanize and pull people to their channel. And then what do they show you when a lot of times they're on the channel? How much fun they having, how many places they done visited, how much, sites they done seen. And it's like this, people are living this dream. And so from that standpoint, when you're dealing with codependence and you're dealing with not having a position of actual self-control, now all of a sudden other people want that. And by wanting that, now I'm comparing myself to them, in which creates certain levels of heightened, not heightened depression, certain levels of heightened depression, which cause you to sink right back into what we was talking about earlier, which goes into how your diet now is built around your emotional state. So you eat based upon being in a certain emotional depressed mode, and then you buy things based upon certain types of depression, and then depression just basically feeds into being a consumer. And just like Comrade Didi said, stealing the theft of your joy. So that's what we find ourselves in. So it becomes this perpetual cycle of things going in, further and further downhill, sinking you further and further into a trap. So now that we talk about the above definitions that lay the groundwork for the current collective state, so let's dig a little bit in deeper within the Panther perspective. So here, this was extracted from Revolutionary Intercommunalism and the Right of Nations to Self-Determination by Huey P. Newton. And this is a real important piece, and I'll make sure I do email this out to y'all that are on here to study this, on your own, as well as pick up the book. When we started out in October 1966, we were what one would call Black nationalists. We realized that the contradictions in society and the pressure on Black people in particular, and we saw that most people in the past have solved some of their problems by forming into nations. We therefore argued that it was rational and logical for us to believe that our suffering as peoples would end when we establish a nation of our own, composed of our own people. But after a while, we saw that something was wrong with this resolution of the problem. In the past, nationhood was fairly easy thing to accomplish. If we look around now, though, we see that the world, the land space, the livable parts as we know them, is pretty much well settled. So we realized that to create a new nation, we would have to become a dominant fraction in this one. And yet the fact that we did not have power was the contradiction that drove us to seek nationhood in the first place. This is an endless cycle. You see, to achieve nationhood, you needed to become a dominant force. But to become a dominant force, we needed to be a nation. And that's real important, because this plays right into a lot of the complications and complexities of what we deal with today as Panthers. So we made further analysis and found that in order for us to be a dominant force, we would at least have to be have great numbers. So we developed from just plain nationalists or separate nationalists into revolutionary nationalists. We said that we joined with all of other people in the world struggling for decolonization and nationhood, and called ourselves a dispersed colony, because we did not have the geographical concentration that other so-called colonies had, but we did have Black communities throughout the country. Example being San Francisco, Los Angeles, New Haven, etc. And there are many similarities between these communities and the traditional kind of colony. We also thought that if we allied with those other colonies, we would have a greater number, a greater chance, a greater force, and that is what we needed, of course, because only force keeps us a colonized people. Now, mind you, let's also go back to when we talk about this, or think about where he was coming from when he said only force keeps us a colonized people. When we deal with the psychology of mind control and what we talked about with that, that goes into, it's a lot deeper than just physical force. But remember, that's when we have to apply our trifactor, and we go into mental, physical, and spiritual, as well as psychological. So it's more to it than that. But on the surface, yes, force is the main point. So we saw that it was not only beneficial for us to be revolutionary nationalists, but to express our solidarity with those friends who suffered many of the same kinds of pressures we suffered. Therefore, we change our self definitions. And see, this goes into heavily into why within our local objectives, we start off with what we call the 3Ds, which is define, develop, and defend. So we'll touch on that a little bit later. But notice how he says here, therefore, we changed our self definitions. And see, that goes into the critical thinking that we talk about. We said that we are not only revolutionary nationalists, that is, nationalists who want revolutionary change in everything, including the economic system. And so that's emphasized here, because that's where the whole point and perspective of personal investment comes from. So see, this whole passage that we're talking about breaks down the aspect of personal investment and opens up the idea the idea of community. So in stating that again, nationalists who want revolutionary changes in everything, including the economic system. The oppressor inflicts upon us, but we are also individuals deeply concerned with the other people of the world and their desires for revolution. In order to show this solidarity, we decided to call ourselves internationalists. Originally, as I said, we assumed that people could solve a number of their problems by becoming nations. But that conclusion showed our lack of understanding of the world's dialectical development. And see, this goes back to what we talk about when we get into how important it is to learn and embrace politics, which goes into self-governance. Our mistake was to assume that the conditions under which people had become nations in the past still exist today. To be a nation, one must satisfy certain essential conditions. And if these things do not exist or cannot be created, then it is not possible to be a nation. In the past, nation states were usually inhabited by people of a certain ethnic and religious background. They were divided from other people either by a partition of water or great unoccupied land space. This natural partition gave the nation's dominant class and the people generally a certain amount of control over the kinds of political, economic, and social institutions they established. It gave them a certain control over the destiny of their territory. They were secure at least to the extent that they would not be attacked or violated by another nation 10,000 miles away, simply because the means of transporting troops that far did not exist. This situation, however, could not last. Technology developed until there was a definite qualitative transformation in the relationship between nations. And so this is where we find ourselves. We'll see that as we keep going here. We know that you cannot change a part of the whole without changing the whole, and vice versa. So as technology developed and there was an increase in military capabilities and means of travel and communication, nations began to control other territories distant from their own. Usually that they controlled these other lands by sending administrators and settlers who would extract labor from the people or resources from the earth, or both. All right, got you, Liel. This is the phenomenon we call colonialism. The settlers' control over the seeds, land, and the people grew to an extent that it wasn't even necessary for the settlers to be present to maintain the system. He went back home. The people were so integrated with the aggressor that their land didn't look like a colony any longer. But because their land didn't look like a free state either, some theorists started to call these lands neo-colonies. Arguments about the precise definition of these entities developed. They are colonies or not. Are they colonies or not? If they aren't, then what are they? The theorists knew that something had happened, but they did not know what it was. Using a dialectical material method, we, the Black Panther Party, saw the United States was no longer a nation. It was something else. It was more than a nation. It had not only expanded its territorial boundaries, but it had expanded all of its control as well. Going back to what we talked about earlier, we call it an empire. Now, at one time in the world had an empire in which the conditions of rule were different, the Roman Empire. The difference between the Roman and American empires is that other nations were able to exist external to the independence of Rome, the Roman Empire, because their means of exploration, conquest, and control were relatively limited. But when we say empire today, we mean precisely what we say. An empire is a nation state that has transformed itself into a power controlling all the lands and people. We believe that there is no more colonies or neo-colonies. If a people is colonized, it must be possible for them to decolonize and become what they formerly were. But what happens when the raw materials are extracted and the labor exploited within a territory dispersed over the entire globe? When the riches of the whole earth are depleted and used to feed a gigantic industrial machine in the imperialist home, then the people of and the economy are so integrated into imperialist empire that it is impossible to decolonize to return to the former conditions of existence. So Huey dropping some powerful knowledge on this one. If colonies cannot decolonize and return to their original existence as nations, then nations can no longer exist. Nor we believe will they ever exist again, as since there must be nations for revolutionary nationalism or internationalism to make sense, we decided that we would have to call ourselves something new. See, it's a transformation over and over as you discover new levels of what's really going on. We say that the world today is dispersed collection of communities. A community is different from a nation. A community is a small unit with comprehensive collection of institutions that exist to serve a small group of people. And we say further that the struggle in the world today is between small circles that administer and profit from the empire of the United States and the people of the world who want to determine their own destinies. We call this situation intercommunalism. We are now in an age of reactionary intercommunalism in which a ruling circle of small groups of people control all other people by using their technology. At the same time, we say that this technology can solve most of the material contradictions people face, that the material contradictions exist that would allow people of the world to develop a culture that is essentially human and would nurture those things that would allow the people to resolve contradictions in a way that would not cause the mutual slaughter of all of us. The development of such culture would be a revolutionary intercommunalism. Some communities have begun doing this. They liberated their territories and have established provisional governments. We recognize them and say to these governments representatives, the people of China, North Korea, and the people of liberated zones in South Vietnam. Keep in mind when this was written. And the people of North Vietnam. We believe that their examples should be followed so that the order of the day would not be reactionary intercommunalism, which is the empire, but revolutionary intercommunalism. The people of the world, that is, must seize power from the small ruling circle and expropriate the expropriators, pull them down from their pinnacle and make them as equals, and distribute the fruits of the labor that have been denied to us in some equitable way. We know that the machinery to accomplish these skills exists, and we want access to it. So any comments on that? Because that was a powerful, real powerful piece there.
I feel like I need to print it out, highlight it, underline it, annotate it. Yeah, I mean, if anyone else has an actual comment about it, I feel like I need to like reread it.
Yeah, yeah. Again, it was real powerful. And so the whole point is when I thought of personal investment, I went back and started researching and looking, from our studies within the Panther Party. I had to really dig in terms of finding some material that would coincide real well with the narrow-minded perspective that we have been taught. And see, this exposes us to the fact that we're dealing with a global world society. And too often, as people, when we try to approach problem solving, we're not looking at things holistically. We're not looking at things from a global perspective and point of view. And this actually stagnates us in terms of just our ability to actually make a difference. This is why we find ourselves caught up on so much of a political hamster wheel in terms of what we're operating from, and having a in means to dealing with some of the levels of oppression that we're facing, because we're not taking a step back and having more of a bird's eye view of the inherent aspects of the problem. So what Huey did is he broke down the different stages of development that the party went through in terms of working toward not just the party really, but Black people's struggle here in the United States in terms of where we find ourselves. And even when he started going into the aspects of provisional government, that led right back into the Republic of New Africa, because Republic of New Africa established a provisional government based on the same principles that Huey was talking about. But then it came a point in time to where, especially when revolution didn't kick off in the late 60s, it came a point in time to where you start recognizing that this whole thing about us pulling ourselves together for the sake of establishing a nation, well, how do we do that when we don't have the power as a people to form a nation? And then we turn around and realize, well, you know what? In order to get the power, we have to be a nation. Well, in order to be a nation, we have to have the power. So that's what he meant when he started talking about that cycle. And so he further breaks it down into going into the different degrees of awareness of why things are the way they are. And this ties right back to let me go back up to where we started here. So this ties right back up to our definition and views upon personal investment, which is why we call this the personal investment in the opposition of American imperialism, because that's in essence what his speech was about, the opposition of American imperialism. But we have to take personal investment. In other words, we have to do things that take us away from this individual path that just adds to the cycle of imperialism. Now that we had that discussion about imperialism, if you look at this chart now, then what in essence what you see is a clear-cut path to maintaining the imperialistic perspectives from the current generation to the next generation, back to the next generation, back to the next generation. So we see how that continually ties right back into this same cycle, and it's referred to as life cycle planning. So you can see how we've entrapped ourselves into a part of a society that we've never even really existed in terms of what investments really mean. And so then when we dive into these examples of expanding what it means to deal with investments, it starts making a lot more sense. And just rereading some of these for those of y'all that started late, when we talk about personal investment, raising the political and social conscience of children. Now, going back to the Panther Party, remember that when they did went and protested against I believe it's the Mumford Act that dealt with the firearms and taking that right away from the American citizens here in California, and went to the state capitol, and then the weapons got pulled back from the Panther Party. That prevented the Panther Party from then being able to confront the police, which is how they initially started out the Black Panther Party for self-defense, is to confront the police, because the police was basically oppressing the communities. Well, then after we no longer were able to arm ourselves on that front, what we did is we worked on the political and social consciousness of the children. And that's when we opened up the breakfast and lunch programs. That's when we opened up the programs to where we embedded ourselves within a community and started dealing with self-determination as a community, which in essence is the same principle that goes into having an intact community where the dollar circulates within the community, where we solve our own problems, to where we basically are operating like a miniature nation, which is why he went back at the end of that document and started talking about the community. But keep in mind that this first point that we got up here is what labeled the Black Panther Party for self-defense to be the public enemy #1 to the United States of America, raising the political and social consciousness of the children. That is what put us on that list. That is what made us the greatest threat to the internal security of the United States. It had nothing to do with the gun. It had nothing to do with the rhetoric. It had to do with something that would break the cycle of personal investment and break the cycle of the mind control that is being portrayed and delivered across our people. And then, so going into the rest of these examples, exercising self-defense for the well-being of defending others. So now you expand that, and it's not just simply about you now learning self-defense because you're scared that something might happen to you, but you're literally taking self-defense to the next level, and you want to defend the cause. You want to defend the people. And so that's taking personal investment to the whole new level. Eating healthy for longevity as opposed to eating for emotional support. And by doing that, when we talk about longevity, now we're able to be around. Now we're able to deal with the physical, emotional, and psychological repair of the trauma that we went through. And we eat accordingly. Work in a community garden in addition to your own garden. This teaches us to collectively work together and build together, which is emoja from that standpoint. Being on a jury trial, we often fray and hide and duck and dodge the going to court. And this is just a real big one within the community. We have to represent our peers. Reading for the sake of acquiring a new life skill, not built around financial gain. Too often we are not forming on our own identity, and we're not recognizing what we need to be simply because our level of growth is all based around that box in that cycle that we talked about in the beginning there. Casting your vote on a local election to someone outside of the lesser evil category. As I stated earlier, when we talk about that, when we go out to vote, we tend to just simply think about, well, let me vote for the one that's going to do poison me the slowest. And that's our approach to politics, which again feeds into our lack of awareness of what it means to deal with self-determination. Supporting a political office campaign other than the asses or the ivories, which is basically the donkeys and the elephants. So what we're saying here is that there's more to the political process than Democrats and Republicans, which is enhanced why we're the Black Panther Party. But it's hard to get to that point. Joining or supporting co-ops, which goes into us empowering each other and forming, communities of self-empowerment and communities of shared resources, as opposed to approaching everything from the actual dollar currency that is used against us. Because from that standpoint, the dollar is constantly losing its value, but goods and trades and services are not losing their value, but the dollar that you use to trade those things are. Learning how to use a firearm so you can teach others. Again, going into the idea of collective operation and protection. Going back to our us defining who we are, developing who we are, and then defending who we are. So these examples follow right along with the 3Ds that we deal with within the Panther Party. And when we talked earlier about disaster preparedness, planning for your family, then the neighborhood, then the community. So from that standpoint, if you are in an environment, and this just goes back to when we talk about Pan-Africanism. So from that standpoint, when you deal with Pan-Africanism, you deal with the realization that you can't just isolate yourself and have an approach to where once your little pocket has made a dent, then y'all are free, because you'll be isolated. And that does not change the overall collective oppression that's happening around the world. So this puts you right back in the mind state of becoming larger than yourself. Supporting a cop watch, not just being a nosy neighbor. deals with the element of recognizing that the oppressor is out doing things within your community to to wreak injustice. And so therefore you have to be a part of something that's going to benefit and hold them accountable for what they're supposed to be doing, which is protect and to serve. Joining the Black Panther Party as opposed to joining a block party every other week. Working within grassroots movement instead of honking your horn at those people blocking your way to work. Recognizing the importance of protesting, how protests really should be utilized in terms of galvanizing the people, in terms of bringing the light on the situation, and then going back into what we talked about when we say joining a grassroots movement or joining the Black Panther Party or supporting Cop Watch and so on and so forth. So basically everything we deal with and give our time to is an investment, whether that's an investment for the better or an investment for the worse. It is an investment. And so this goes into just changing the dynamic of and expanding our consciousness of what we actually give ourselves to. So I just wanted to recap that to kind of bring us around up to speed as to the importance of this passage here. So now here we definitely go into things that most of the Panthers we talk about within most of our training here. Mind cleansing. So all of that other stuff that we talked about brings us around to mind cleansing, which is the invoking of redefining your appetite to embrace higher quantitative content. So in essence, what we're saying here is now that you really see what's going on, you have the appetite to want to learn more. You have the appetite to want to grow more. You have the appetite to want to do more. And so you are now embedded within the community, and it's not just about you no more. So that's what a mind cleansing is, as opposed to brainwashing, or as opposed to what we talked about earlier with mind control. So now we're talking about a mind cleansing. Complete construction. Completeness means to plan, initiate, monitor, control, and then finish something. As Panthers, we also refer to this as the 3 Ds, which is define, develop, and defend, or the 3 Ps, which is to perceive, pursue, and preserve. So those the 3 Ps basically feed into and enhance and allow the process of the 3 Ds. So from that standpoint, we're dealing now with what we call complete construction. And complete construction requires us to be able to be a visionary. And to be a visionary means that you're able to see things from the manifestation of them, which is the planning operation, all the way to the end result, which is finishing up with that project. And too often we go into things from being emotionally charged. And when we do so, we're not going to ever get to a point of finishing, because we started out based upon an emotional charge, and starting out with emotional charge, you never really had an end goal. It was just to simply get away from the pain and the trauma that you are dealing with currently. But you can't just be what we call a runaway slave and try to escape something without having a destination. You see, too often we psychologically run from something, but don't know where we're running to, and I think it was named Immortal Technique, and Ron, you might know that song. He has, in fact, it was Evie. I think he sampled it from somebody, but I don't know the group he sampled it from. But it's a little passage that say people are running, but where are they going? And he just keep chanting that as a mantra. The people are running, where are they going? And it's like basically showing how folks have no idea what's really happening. They know they're in pain. They know things are wrong. They know they're oppressed, and so they want to get away from that. So obviously we want to get away from pain. Obviously we want to get away from things that are harming us. But you have to have a plan. You have to have, and you know how to initiate that. Then monitor and control basically means calibrate it, always fine tune it, make sure that foundation stays intact, make sure each level of building is able to support the next level of building, and then be able to finish that and cook it in what we call carbon copy that same mentality or that same winning process somewhere else. So that's in essence what we mean by complete construction. And in order to do that, going back to what Huey talked about within power, is the ability to do or act capable of doing or accomplishing something through will. Again, that willpower, the possession of authority of control or command over others via positional, informational, situational, relational, punitive, or coerced, charismatic, or multiplicity. This is the one that most of us don't recognize. The multiplicity basically means where we're able to come in numbers and basically have a certain ability to gain. And that's what Huey also talked about at one point within that concept. So these positions of power are basically we're directed away from away from the awareness of this, which is again keeps you on the path of an individual. And that's the whole point, is that from the perspective of power, as long as I can continue to isolate you and keep you operating as an individual, I have the ability to control how much of any of these positions of power you can ever truly acquire. So this thing called power is often in exchange for protection, governance, or guidance. In other words, we often grant individual dominance over the collective by pledging over our natural born rights, which is freedom, in exchange for civil liberties, which goes into basically stating that the government will protect you. And by stating that the government protects you, it basically continues to keep you operating in that linear path in terms of your thinking, in terms of your growth, in terms of how you perceive the world around you. So then we have to get into self-determination, the ability to determine and control the process of defining who we are, what we are, when we are, where we are, and why we are. The importance of knowing self over the enemy cannot be understated. And those are the whole points of breaking those down. And when we talk about self-determination, being able to actually ask yourself each one of those things at any moment in time, any moment that you're dealing with anything that's going on in your life, learn how to apply the definition and the rule of self-determination. And so these are things that as Panthers, if we should be applying these to our day-to-day lives. And if we do so, we will make better decisions. We will have better awareness of choice over just simply having options. And that's where we want to be. And so what we find the people stuck in is what we refer to as within the Panther Party. And obviously most of y'all on here already know this because this is what we go over every day, is dealing with the coping mechanism within our mechanism structure, which utilizes the glue factor, guessing, luck, understanding emotions, and survival. This is where most of our people find themselves at any point of the day, to work around, which is to work around. As a self-repair and empowerment functionality is addressed by the missing work of a broken community. Coping is the natural process of tactical in-time moment processing, which is too often exchanged for a solution-based approach, which takes you to the next one, which is before you even get to coping, most people are stuck in the denial mechanism. So before we learn to internalize who we are and address the problems by not just coping with the symptoms, we must first be willing to admit and see our part in failures. This requires personal accountability, and often victimization causes one to look outward for blame. This denial of reflected inner awareness is the result of post-trauma slave disorder. The denial mechanism also applies to a society that operates from entitlement and not realizing the freedoms it has gained. It is a result of stripping other people of their freedoms, aka the working agencies like CIA. And so this goes into, this kind of ends on that same note that Huey left off on that document that we read earlier. So in closing, in all of these different areas that we talked about, now we have to basically get into the personal characteristics of a community activist. And it's a partial list taken from Brother Syke with the Panther 48. And so I do have a link in this document that goes on that YouTube channel if you hadn't checked this out. So number one here, you must be willing to sacrifice playtime for building, which is in essence starting where we left, ending where we left off. Ending where we started, which is personal investment. That basically means sacrificing playtime in order to make something happen or to deal with uh, a future strength. Number two, never allow yourself to be labeled a racist. Hate is an ineffective tool that clouds your judgment. Also, the people have been so shell shocked by racism that they will not listen to you if the enemy can cleverly paint you as a racist and hate monger. You must also understand that this basic point, the people are in love with their oppressor, and that's the problem here. They will fight tooth and nail to maintain this misperceived bond. To hate someone, to discriminate against them, and to attack them because of their racist characteristic is one of the most primitive, reactionary, ignorant thinking that exists. And this is a quote from Asada Shakur.
Brother Work, can you break that down for me?
Elaborate when you say break it down. Close the door. Ask mama, close the door. Which part you want me to break down when you say that?
The entire number 2, if you don't mind.
Okay, so let me just read it and go line by line. Hate is an ineffective tool that clouds your judgment. When we talk about hate, basically going back to the emotional context of how most people tend to live their lives, if I live my life through hate, then I'm being reactionary. That means every action I take is based upon an emotional charge of something that I don't like, as opposed to being solution based and working on things that you do like and goals that you want to accomplish. You are literally going after things simply because you don't like them. And you form your life based around decisions of who you don't like and what you don't like. And so therefore, it goes into clouding your judgments, which causes you to be emotionally charged on all things that you involve in. Now it says here, the people have been so shell shocked by racism that they will not listen to you if the enemy can cleverly paint you as a racist and hate monger. So from that standpoint, and this goes into what we deal with within the Panther Party, is that if you are perceived, and this is what it gets in, this is all he's talking about is perception. If you're perceived to be a racist, then why would I take you for serious, and why would I want to be a part of that? Because now your whole movement is based upon the emboldenment of hating someone else. In other words, we're not about dealing with humanity. We're not about trying to save the planet. We're not about trying to actually fight oppression from the standpoint of equal access, equal opportunity, and everyone having a fair share of righteousness. When you're fighting from a position of hate, it is basically saying, I want to eradicate the planet of this particular people. I don't want them here. And so fighting from hate feeds right back into that, to a bloodlust from that standpoint. And so why would someone want to be a part of that? And so it says here, you must understand this basic point, because it has to do with the relationship with, like we say here, love with the oppressor. And that goes into the relationship that unfortunately people can find themselves in on an individual family level, to where, just say you have an abusive spouse. Oftentimes people think that the displaying of negative emotions to their partner is a way of showing affection. When I don't know how to love myself, then how can I love you? How can I love somebody else? So by not being able to love myself, oftentimes that makes me see through the lenses of hate. And if I see through a lens of hate, there's no way I can truly love you and I can truly care for you, because I don't have that same tie to myself. And so that's what we mean when we say that the people are in love with their oppressor. They will fight tooth and nail to maintain this misperceived bond. That goes back to the concept, like a lot of times what they use with the Willie Lynch, and they go into where you had the house Negro that basically did not want to let the house burn down because he was able to get out of the field. And so from that standpoint, he protect the oppressor and protect everything that the oppressor build, because he's looking at his individual position within the hierarchy of oppression. So just because he's doing a little bit better than others like himself, he feels as he gained something. So again, operating like an individual will cause you to have a misperceived bond with that situation that has put you right in that position of bondage in the first place. And so then we ended by saying to hate someone, to discriminate against them, and to attack them because of their racial characteristic is one of the most primitive, reactionary, ignorant ways of thinking in existence. Because what we're talking about at that point is we're dealing with the separation of not recognizing that we all belong to the human race. And so now we want to start subdividing and finding reasons to go against as opposed to reasons to come together, which is taking us out of balance with the planet. Did that suffice, brother?
Yeah, right on. I guess I'm thinking about people who go as far as to say that like white people are the devil. They try to categorize all white people to be evil, instead of wanting to work together. And like you said, looking at it as we're all a part of the human race and just want equal rights for all colors of people.
Now, let me elaborate a little bit further on that one, because now when you start talking about that one, that goes into specifically, now we have to talk about the Nation of Islam and the whole Yaqub story. See, that goes back to the message of to the black man by Elijah Muhammad. And we start talking about how basically, and see, this is without me trying to attempt to validate the story. What they're getting that the essence of that message from is that the story of Yaqub goes into where supposedly the mad scientists wanted to extract all of the negative aspects of self out of self, which creates a whole different being. That being that was created was the extraction of the devil. So therefore, that devil seed was allowed to live through the kindness of humanity was allowed to live. And by being allowed to live, that seed basically continued its bloodline as a separation now from that which was once whole. So what you had was you had the good and the bad being all inclusive, all in one. But the negative element was extracted. By being extracted and allowed to live an existence upon its own, it became at that point the devil. So it is a whole devil now, whereas now I'm whole good. I extracted the two and create the one and created two. This actually feeds right into the religious story that you see repeated all throughout multiple religions, like the same thing when you talk about Lucifer, who was the best and most beautiful and brightest angel, fell from heaven from the standpoint of wanting to be exactly like God, from the standpoint of the creator. It's literally the same story. And so therefore, what was Satan? Satan became what? The devil. He became the devil. So when Satan becomes the devil, now his entire existence is based around hating that which created him, that which he was extracted from, which was God. Same story. Yaqub is the same exact story that we're talking about when we get into that aspect. And so from that standpoint, now again, you're talking about a point of view and a perspective that takes it to a religious channel. And taking it to a religious channel, if I am viewing an actual extraction of black and white, and from that extracting, one was in essence wanting to become pure good, and I extracted pure evil, then yes, that from that point of view, evil would be the devil. That creation, so to speak, would be the devil. So because of, in reality, where we are, we have to be able to separate ourselves from that religious perspective as it applies to the overall process of where we are in terms of humanity. It makes no practical sense to think that you will eradicate a planet of any specific human type. And so going down that path to me is just is again feeds right back into hatred. But it's kind of real hard to go there with someone from a perspective of a religion that has especially pulled them up from being in a position to where they didn't know no self, no culture, no way of life, no religion, and come out of the gutter, so to speak, of the mentality. So because now we have to go back to someone like a Malcolm X. What was Malcolm X before he was Malcolm El Malik El Shabazz? He was Malcolm Little. And what did Malcolm Little do? Fornicate. Malcolm Little sold drugs. Malcolm Little pimp. Malcolm Little gambled. Malcolm Little did all of the negative things that made up a community and made up an individual within his society. And what did it do? It landed him in jail. Once he went to jail, he undergone a self-transformation by reflecting and seeing all of the wrongdoings based upon the emulation lifestyle that he lived. And his savior, through Elijah Muhammad, from that standpoint, basically taught him how to be an upright African, what they refer to as African Asiatic. Through that process, which they teach is the extracting of the negative in order to be positive. So therefore, when you think of it that way, dealing with the yin and the yang, you think you're gonna think in extremes, and you're gonna think in absolutes. And so therefore, everything that I am in terms of making good on a process is the counter to that is the devil. The counter to that is evil. So that's how you get those extremes. And yeah, we will obviously have a perpetual internal fight amongst ourselves as revolutionaries and as organizers and as Panthers, even between formations in terms of that ideology and that thinking. But that's the source of that. So I can't necessarily tell you that I have an answer that people who have been lifted out of a negative lifestyle into something that is more progressive will be willing to strip away certain things that are foundational principles in order to have themselves feel uplifted as an African, if that makes sense.
Understood.
But that's the slippery slope we go down when we talk about that. So number 3 here, in terms of dealing with personal characteristics of community activists, the system is not all powerful. Mumia Abu-Jamal taught that not only is the system not all powerful, but it isn't even real. The system is an idea, and ideas can be fought and dismantled. The system gains its power from the consent of the governed. If the people change their thinking today, the system would change tomorrow. The spirit of the people is greater than the man's technology. If you knew, that goes into what we talked about earlier in terms of the first actual example that I gave of expanding on personal investment, when we talked about raising the political and the consciousness of the children. And so when we went into that and dealt with that, that is what made the Black Panther Party public enemy number 1 when we talk about the political and social consciousness of our people, of the next generation. And so from that standpoint, that takes you right into the idea of realizing that we actually do have the power to make change. But because we're talking about a perpetual cycle of even going into what we last dealt with in terms of racism, and a perpetual cycle of staying at an educated level below or at a 6th grade education, in terms of being an adult, in terms of what stimulates us, and in terms of us not having the altitude, like we said earlier in the definition, in dealing with mind cleansing, to invoke the redefining of your aptitude to embrace higher quantitative content. Because all of these things that we suffer from as individuals in terms of our trauma, this is why it is hard to get to a point to where if we change our thinking today, the system would change tomorrow. That's what makes that impractical, in terms of the fact that it is a inundated problem that we're dealing with, which is generational, which is why the Panther Party, we have within our structure, our current structure now, a generational advancement. That's why we have that, is to combat those things that prevent us from being able to change the world. So number 4 here, you must have integrity. A person is defined by what they do and don't do. I am a revolutionary Black freedom fighter, and struggle against the government oppression is what I do. Cooperating with the government against my people and my comrades, family, and friends, and fellow prisons, or snitching on them is something I do not do. Sundiata Acoli. So that was, basically a statement from him. So we have to have integrity. Number 5, you must be strong enough to stand for what you believe in. Never break weak. I tell you, comrades, that you can only die once. So don't die 1,000 times worrying about it. If you knew, state that. Revolution is about freedom. The will to free yourself from limited thinking, personal weaknesses, and destructive habits. This is a person who wishes to be free and share those techniques of freedom with those around them. And so from